this could be retitled Why CAPS is a Sustainability Process in Aquaculture, because Dr. Hartman, many of the characteristics you described in CAPS are common to our framework for sustainability, not just in aquaculture, but across all agricultural, all animal agriculture or processes and sectors in the United States. One of the challenges we have, as you indicated, is this issue of standardization. It's critical for our producers, if we're going to be engaging in some sort of a common approach to sustainability or to biosecurity, is that we have certainty about the process. And that certainty often is obfuscated by complexity, unnecessary complexity, jargon, or 50-stage flowcharts, or other things. And so I love the 5 rules, or better yet, hearkening back to our 3-fingered ancestors, the 3 rules, our lizard ancestors. The 3 rules. 3 is a mystical number, right? In almost every human endeavor. Define, plan, and implement. This is what we call sustainability, our continuous improvement process for sustainability in agriculture in the United States. This process, this very simple process for continuous improvement in agriculture, this sustainability framework, is in final review by American National Standards Institute as an ANSI Standard 629, and will be published next month as an ANSI standard. The reason that's important is because this gives us now a citable process to say that we are engaged in sustainability using ANSI 629, and so everyone who cares knows what that means, and people who don't know can find out very quickly. That standardization the value of standardization cannot be overstated, especially when we start talking about markets. When we start talking about moving these things into markets that are currently closed to us because people don't know how our producers produce. I was in France with the U.S. Secretary, with the U.S. Foreign Ag Service and the Secretary of the Department of State 3 weeks ago, explaining what U.S. agriculture producers do with regards to sustainability, and they were very excited. When I say they, I mean the French Ministry of Agriculture, the French Ministry of Environment, the 3 agricultural universities I presented to, the French National Academy of Agriculture, the MPs I talked with, the senators I spoke with, were very excited to see a standard like this, because it gives them something that they can say, look, we can replicate this. We don't have to just be reacting to every NGO that has their next moneymaker flag to wave at the expense of our farmers, and we can stop our farmers from dumping manures in our streets and blocking our highways with the tractors, and turning, as they did in Toulouse the day before I was there, and protest because they're going broke because of all the regulations. 200 permits. At a certain point, we have to say this is just ridiculous. Let's just stop growing things. Let's just stop. At a certain point, that's what our producers are doing. You know that. What's the average age of the aquaculture producer? It's probably younger than a soybean producer. But we have an age problem in agriculture, not just in the United States, but around the world, because no one wants to get into it, because it is a guaranteed way to lose your family heritage. If your family left you land, this is a guaranteed way to lose that. You'll go broke and you'll sell your land off or lose it to bankruptcy, or it's a guaranteed way to penury. That's what young people see agriculture as today. I'm an agricultural engineer, and my students don't want to be agricultural producers because they can't afford it, and if they can't afford it, they can't make money at it. If they can even get into it, they can't make money at it. So this is a way for us to start thinking about sustainability in this holistic way too, because ultimately, the first priorities for any commercial enterprise are economic viability. When we talk about sustainability across all of our ag sectors, we say economic viability is job one. Without that, there is no sustainability. There is no enterprise. Social license to operate, reputational control over brands, safe, secure, and stable supply chain. Does that sound resonant with this morning's discussion, right? Access to markets, which are all related to those things. Now, we have to provide some definitions. An indicator is a variable or condition that are important to producers and their customers. That's an indicator, something you care about. A metric is a measure of the indicator. A benchmark is a metric at some point in time. And that's what we're working with the Hawaii Department of Agriculture with these 2 production systems. We met in March of last year at this meeting, annual meeting, to develop, to deliberate and decide. So the deliberation goal for the workshop was to articulate a range of sustainability concerns across stakeholder sectors. The decision goals for the workshop, the decision goal was to develop a set of key performance indicators, things we care about, for each dimension of sustainability for U.S. aquaculture producers. So we started the process of this discussion, and of course the indicators are SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, outcomes-based. We care about not the process or practice, back to your foot bath discussion. It's not just that you do the practice. Why do you do the practice? It's the outcome you care about. Think about the outcomes always. We've become largely because it's just our human nature, but also partially because of misdirected management of our federal and state agricultural policies. We've become practice-centric. If you just do the practice, check the box, you're done. And that creates disasters for any best management practice. The best management practice serves the outcome. The best management practice is not the outcome in and of itself. When I started working in agriculture and watershed management back in the 80s, we were working with U.S. EPA Clean Water Act 319 funded programs. These were non-point source management programs at watershed levels. And at that time, EPA was through policy, was federally prohibited from collecting data on the effectiveness of the best management practices that they were paying to implement. Federally prohibited. They couldn't collect data on the outcomes. It was just about the practice. And that's the way you ensure that the practice is irrelevant and the outcomes don't matter. And that's exactly what happened according to the Department of Office of Management and Budget's assessment of 319 programs in 2005. They were completely irrelevant to the driving outcomes. So that practice, that restriction was lifted then. But I want you to think about what we've come through then as a regulatory management entity in the United States in our agriculture, what we've imposed on our ag producers, this legacy of mixed messages. It's created chaos and distrust. And that's why ag producers are reluctant to engage. That's why we have to rebuild trust through this sort of transparent, simple engagement mechanism. Science-driven. I don't care what you believe, you can't prove it, it doesn't matter. And if you can't prove it with objective, replicable data, it doesn't matter. This is what I say to our NGOs, who are well-intended but ill-informed 20-something-year-olds who graduated from Humboldt with degrees in philosophy and think they know how to save the world. And they want to tell our producers, our 65, 70-year-old ag producers, our fifth-generation producers, how to produce their crops. Because if you just do it the way I know you're supposed to do it, because I read something in National Geographic 2 years ago that tells you how you're supposed to do this, I deal with it. That's really the bane of my existence, are those well-intended, ignorant 20-year-olds. I have one. It's a daughter. Technology neutral. We don't dictate what technologies are good or bad. The outcomes and other regulatory bodies dictate that. And transparent. The world should know for that trust issue. So we developed a set of indicators. Now, these slides will be available to you, and I can send them to you in a PDF or in a PowerPoint form to you. I'm a university professor. Everything I do is public and available. You're welcome to use them. The metrics, the indicators are global. Indicators are things we all care about. That's important to discuss because the indicators are developed with stakeholders that are not just producers, with multiple stakeholders, conservation organizations, some of those 20-year-olds in the room. Those are the things we care about. The metrics are context-specific, location, process, operation, scale, markets, and events. This is what we're working with Todd on, is to figure out how to develop very specific metrics for very specific production systems. So, where we started, priority selection. We identified the most important indicators important to producers and their customers. We selected indicators that have established metrics, developing experience with assessment reporting to create a process that works for everyone. Start with the simple stuff. When I tell my kids to clean their room, I tell them to pick up their laundry first. Right? We'll get to organizing your desk and all the other stuff when you picked up the laundry first. So the first phase of the indicators are established. Identify the second phase. And so that's what we are. Continuous improvement is never done. And that's what every farmer, every businessman, every CEO understands. You're never done. This is not a certification process. This is a continuous engagement process to deal with the emerging challenges of disease, the emerging challenges of shifting markets, the emerging challenges of demographics, of regulations, of water supply. The deliberation process is time-consuming, messy, because there are people involved, people with really wacky ideas sometimes, and some people don't really have good social skills in this room. Some people don't know how to get along with people who disagree with them. I had a deliberation process on an urban watershed management strategy when we had a stakeholder meeting. This is a meeting from last year, by the way, when we were going through this process. But and I'm an engineer, so I'm not a social scientist, but I've been doing these deliberation processes for over 20 years. So I had a group of folks who were trying to work in Conway, Arkansas on a watershed that had major flooding problems and had a small lake. And we had an old retired Navy guy who probably was 65, 70 years old, and an old retired Army guy who was probably the same generation. These are probably late generation Vietnam vets. And they got into a disagreement, and they were going nose to nose. I mean, so I had to step in between them. This wasn't just a disagreement. They were ready to start knocking each other down. Now, either of these guys could have taken me. These guys were still tough old guys. But we have to be prepared to deal with the human element of this sort of conflict when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about biosecurity, we have to deal with these conflicts. They can be made positive. Sometimes they just have to be managed, and sometimes you just have to avoid them. I do not invite people into the room who want our ag producers to fail, whose stated objective is to put them out of business. PETA, U.S. Humane Society, they're not invited to the room. I don't invite them into the party because I would invite someone into my house who wants to burn my house down. It's that simple. And if they want to burn the house down, they're not welcome to my house. Maybe we'll meet at the police station. That's another story. The process we use is very simple. We defined our priorities based upon, we use 4 sectors, right? Animal, community, economy, and environment, taking the whole spectrum of the world and breaking it into categories. Now, for our first meeting with our group last year, we didn't use an animal at that point, and I think we should in the next meeting, and it will show up in a minute why. Because if you don't break the animal out as a separate category, then all the animal issues get conflated across the social, environmental, and economic priorities. And so we've learned that as we work with other sectors. So then we also used a materiality matrix where we took the producer's priorities and the other stakeholder priorities, and we ranked priorities. And so we end up with a set of, we put all those sticky notes from the target, from the 4 quadrants, into a set of priorities by each of the sectors within the room. And this allows us to move to a categorization of all the things that matter to us. So if you look at, this is for, the top line's cut off, but these are the economic dimensions. And you can see everything from consumer value, marketing, cost of production, environmental regulation, access to capital. These would be the big indicators and the way you would measure, things you could measure from low to high, things that would be priorities. So this allows us to get a sense of what people's perspectives and values are. I'm not going to go through all these in tedious detail. You have these. We have an annual report from last year as well that you should have access to. I can send to you as well that covers this. But just to show you that the value of spending a day in the room together to categorize these values. How many of you guys were there last year? A couple of you were, right? So what we ended up with then were a set of top priorities. These are not the only priorities. This is the starting place. It's for economic, social, environmental. And you should recognize some of these, Dr. Hartman. These should be very familiar from what we discussed this morning with biosecurity and what you presented to with the CAPS program. Consumer value, marketing, cost of production, access to capital, government regulations. Of course, farm raised or not. That's a whole suitcase of issues there. Consumer understanding, product quality, food safety, affordability, risk of disease, sustainability of feed sources, water quality, efficiency of resource use, and environmental regulations for environmental. So as we look at all of these, the question is, which ones are the most important? Where do we start? Because across these 3, and you could see if I added animal, I could bring about 4 of these over to animal and out of the other 3, and that's what we need to do next. So in the process of, over the last 4 years, not only have we been working with agriculture, or with aquaculture, we've also been working with beef, poultry, pork, dairy, other animal sectors in the United States using the same process. We just finished this stakeholder engagement with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef in January 2016, so January of this year. We developed our Phase 2 metrics for priority indicators as well. And the list of priorities for beef are profit indicators, profitability, efficiency and yield, innovation technology, regulatory environment, consumer perception, sector level continuity, food waste reduction, planet,
water resources, greenhouse gas, air, soil, land, biodiversity, food waste, people, food safety, consumer perception, food security, community vitality, worker safety and well-being, food waste, access to skilled labor, transparency and traceability, animal well-being, responsible use of technologies, health, transparency, traceability. Look familiar? This is what we're seeing. This across all U.S. animal ag production, there's convergence on these things we care about. Yet, how often do we talk to each other? Rarely, if ever. And that's one of our big challenges. I know that's one of the issues that NIAA is excited about engaging, because there is no common place right now for all of these sectors to engage in this conversation. You don't have to coordinate all these things. You don't have to align. There's a natural alignment occurring because these are self-evident. These are things we all care about because they're common challenges in animal proteins. Now, we've prioritized these with economic, environmental, community, and animal with high priority indicators, and we're developing metrics for these. Profitability, efficiency, yield, innovation, and technology. Water resources, air emissions. This is for beef. Land integrity, soil resources. Food safety, transparency, consumer perception, animal well-being, responsible use of technology, animal health. Now, just to remind you, beef production, like aquaculture, is complex. I would say of all the animal sectors I've worked with, aquaculture is the most complex, and we'll see that in my next presentation because we've categorized using APHIS's categorization system of animal production, of aquaculture production. And there are 75 at least categories of aquaculture production across fins, shells, and crustaceans, mollusks and crustaceans. So there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of different production strategies, and with each of those, a whole lot of different ways of producing animal. All of those are relevant to metrics. But we're going to be developing metrics for the beef industry with cow-calf operators, with feedlots, then all the way up the supply chain with range-fed producers as well. Real quickly, the National Pork Board. We did the same thing. We actually developed this method 2 years ago with the National Pork Board, and our final key performance indicators there, human health and safety, community neighbor relations, employee retention, employee safety and health, biosecurity, food security, product integrity. Animal care and welfare, the PQA Plus program, which is analogous to the CAPS program. So you can they just rolled their animal care and welfare program into their sustainability metrics program. So that's the way they measure it. Why create something new when you already have something that works? Integrate them, because as you'll see after the break, one of our biggest challenges is data continuity, data aggregation, data analytics, and data reporting. We collect a bucket load of data. Our producers are inundated with reporting criteria, and most of those data go to nowhere. They go into an empty hole, and nothing is done with them. We don't analyze them. They're not sentinels. They're just check the box, because that's what we do. Remember, we go back to that, follow the procedure, not the outcome. Air quality, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, land use, nutrient management, water use, water quality for environmental, economic, community, economic, consumer, food, product, production efficiency, and profitability. The point I'm making is there's convergence and consilience across all of the animal ag sectors, and I would say I want to assure you that's even occurring across the feed industry. I work with the U.S. Soybean Export Council and the U.S. Soybean Sustainability Assurance Protocol in developing a continuous improvement process for their SSAP. As part of that, they have adopted a set of, the U.S. soybean producers in the United States under USD adopted a set of goals for land use, soil erosion, total soil erosion, irrigation, total irrigation, energy use efficiency, total energy use, greenhouse gas, and total greenhouse gas. So we evaluated what they've done, we benchmarked their work, and they've set a goal of increasing efficiency 10% by 2025, that's in 10 years, 10% increase in 10 years. Decreasing soil erosion 25% by 2025, 25 and 10, or 25 by 25. Irrigation water use they set aside for now because it's a little complicated, because we don't know who's irrigating when or what, where. Energy use, increasing energy use efficiency 10%, reducing greenhouse gas emissions total by 10% in 10 years. So they set goals now for their sector, and they're going about the business of taking their resources, so their checkoff funds, which they have and aquaculture doesn't have, and dedicating those resources to achieving these goals. This is their primary work.
So where I'm recommending that we start with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Aquaculture is in the things we have the most data about. Sustainability of feed resources. We know where the feed's coming from. We can evaluate the current status and improvement of feed resources. Water quality. We have data because you collect the data. And then efficiency of resource use. Feed conversions, efficiency, and mortality, the two greatest things you can measure. We already collect these data, so the question is, how do we collect it? What do we do with it? Where does it go? How can we use it to drive continuous improvement? And then we can start moving through some of these others. If we can get a CAPS program initiative as part of this, then we can start looking at animal welfare issues. We can start looking at risk management, at disease, as also as integrated metrics. We're collecting for another program already that gives us access to markets and allows us to, it's good for the industry, roll it into our sustainability indicators, and it becomes part of a comprehensive whole as opposed to just another set aside, another thing we do. I'm going to have another presentation after a break. We've got a break coming up.
You're finished, yeah.
Yeah, so whenever we're done, so we'll get out there a little early for these guys, so we'll get the good snacks. Identify the measurable elements within each indicator, and that's what we'll talk about next. Each sector will identify what is already being measured, and we're doing this with all of our other, with poultry, pork. Poultry, by the way, we're just in the process of, come on in. We're just in the process with poultry of identifying what our key performance indicators are. They just hired a facilitator to help work through that process. I'm serving as their technical advisor. They've hired a facilitator out of Europe. I have concerns, but we'll see how that plays out to do this work. But each sector will identify what is already being measured, what can be measured, and what should be measured. And we'll talk about those data issues next. Same issues you have with CAPS. Common measurements across sectors will be called system metrics. Some things everybody who produces something in the water measures. And I would say basic water quality parameters would be one of those. Animal health would be others. Some metrics are unique to the sector, and I'm calling a sector a category of production. Fins, shells, mollusks, plants. Oh yeah, and plants, of course. And I keep forgetting that, but they're in my category. The plants. So if we said 4 big sectors, and within those subsectors, so you can figure that you can anticipate that we'd have unique sector metrics too, and that's okay. They still support a common indicator. We just have to figure out a way to roll them up. And then priority systems and sector metrics for benchmarking, because the whole point of this is documenting improvement or failure to improve, documenting trends. Are we getting better? Are we staying the same? Are we getting worse? 3 possible futures. There's not really a fourth one that I know of. And so if we're staying the same, maybe that's good, maybe it's not. If we're getting better, well, that's generally good by definition. If we're getting worse, that means we need to probably change something. That's the whole purpose of this. This is not about saying one producer's good or one producer's bad, one sector's good or one sector's bad, or one organization or one farmer is better than the other. This is about all of us getting better at what we do. That framing is important. One of the issues I deal with on my campus, again, are those well-intended 20-year-olds. And I'm fighting right now an initiative on our campus where they want to have a filming of Cowspiracy. You ever heard of Cowspiracy? It's an anti-cattle. Basically, cows are ruining the planet. Cattle are ruining the planet because, now if you raise fish, it's not a bad message. It's a better protein, right? But the problem with this is not based upon science, and the organization that does that is in the business of making these sorts of inflammatory documentaries. That's their bread and butter, and so of course they're going to take whatever story they have and they're going to spin it in a way that allows them to make money. There's no conspiracy about cattle, but they've made one, and the conspiracy they've insinuated is that environmental organizations are ignoring the impact of cattle because of fear of retribution from beef industry. Now, if you've ever worked in an environmental organization, you know that that's the last thing they're afraid of, that they make their bread and butter by going after these big industries. And so that's their moneymaker too. So this is the sort of nonsense we see, is this, there's even parasitism within, or cannibalism within the activism community about saying we're more activists than you are. There's certain organizations you don't invite to the party. As I said earlier, we have to be very careful, but we do need to find those willing partners who are good critics of all of the things we do, and I think Environmental Defense Fund is one of them. I think that the World Wildlife Fund is one of them. I think the Nature Conservancy for land use and for marine activities is one. So I think we have 3 good conservation organizations that have a history that we could work with in the production arena. that have credibility and that can help us get better. Getting better is what we're about. And so we need critics. So